Zen teachings have offered a path to inner quiet. Not through effort, but through release. The stories you're about to hear have helped countless people find inner peace. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. Wherever you are right now, whatever brought you here tonight, you can let yourself settle. There's nothing to accomplish right now. No test to pass, no lesson to master. These stories will simply unfold, one after another, like waves on a shore. Tonight, we'll explore the wisdom of Zen Buddhism through ancient tales. Each story carries a teaching about finding stillness, about discovering the peace that's already present beneath our restless thoughts. These aren't lessons you need to memorize or understand completely. They are companions on your journey into sleep. So, relax now. Take a slow, deep breath, and let's begin our journey together. By the sea, where waves rolled endlessly against black sand beaches and the air tasted of salt and fish, there lived an old man who spent his nights casting nets into dark water. The village knew him simply as the fisherman. He had no other name that anyone remembered. He had fished these waters for so long that some of the older villagers claimed he'd been old when they were children. A boy named Takeshi often came to watch him work. Takeshi was 12 years old, quick-minded and restless, the kind of child who needed to understand everything, who asked endless questions until the adults in his life grew tired of answering. His teachers at the village school praised his intelligence, but worried about his inability to simply accept things as they were. One evening, as the sun sank toward the horizon and turned the sea orange and purple, Takeshi found the old fisherman preparing his nets on the shore. The fisherman worked slowly, checking each knot, untangling each twist, his weathered hands moving with the confidence of someone who'd performed these same actions 10,000 times. "Old man," Takeshi said, sitting down on a nearby rock, "how do you know where to cast your nets?" The fisherman didn't look up from his work. He continued checking the nets, testing their strength, making small adjustments. Takeshi waited. When no answer came, he tried again. The sea is so large. The fish could be anywhere. How do you know which spot will have fish and which won't? Still, the old man said nothing. He gathered his nets, walked to the water's edge, and with a practiced motion, cast them into the waves. The nets spread wide in the air, beautiful for a moment against the darkening sky, then fell and vanished beneath the surface. The fisherman stood holding the rope, his eyes on the black water, his expression calm. Takeshi felt frustration rising in his chest. "You're not answering me. Don't you know? Or are you just guessing?" The old man remained silent. The tide whispered against the sand. A seabird called from somewhere in the gathering dusk. Minutes passed. Takeshi shifted on his rock, uncomfortable with the silence. His mind filled it with more questions, each one louder than the last. What if there were no fish? What if the fisherman was wasting his time? What if there was a better method, a smarter way? Something the old man was too stubborn or too simple to understand. "What if you catch nothing?" Takeshi finally asked, unable to bear the quiet any longer. The fisherman remained still. His hands rested on the rope. His eyes stayed on the water. He didn't seem bothered by the question or by Takeshi's presence. He just stood there, patient and present. More time passed. The sun touched the horizon, spreading red light across the water. Takeshi's restlessness grew. He wanted to leave, to find someone who would answer his questions, but something kept him there on the rock, watching. Finally, the fisherman began to pull in his nets. His movements were smooth and unhurried. Hand over hand, the rope came in, water dripping from the fibers, the nets emerging from the darkness. This time, they were full. Silver fish flickered in the fading light, dozens of them, caught in the mesh, their bodies flashing as they moved. The fisherman pulled the nets onto the shore and began removing the fish one by one, placing them in a wooden box. He still said nothing. Takeshi stood up and walked closer. "But how did you know? How did you know they would be there?" For the first time, the old man looked directly at him. His eyes were clear and calm, holding something that might have been amusement. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't know." Takeshi frowned. "But you cast your nets. You chose that spot." "I cast my nets," the fisherman agreed. He returned to his work, removing more fish, his hands gentle, even as the fish struggled. "So you were guessing?" "Was I?" The old man didn't sound defensive or irritated by the questions. He sounded genuinely curious, as if he was considering the question for the first time. Takeshi felt his frustration reaching a peak. "You must have been doing something. You must have some method, some reason for choosing that spot instead of another spot." The fisherman finished emptying his nets and began preparing them for another cast. "The fish move," he said simply. "The currents change. The water is deep and dark. I cast where I cast. Sometimes the nets are full. Sometimes they're empty. Either way, I pull them in and cast again." "That's not an answer," Takeshi said, his voice tight. "No," the old man agreed. "It's not." He walked to the water's edge again and cast his nets into the darkening sea. They spread and fell. He stood holding the rope, eyes on the water as the stars began to appear overhead. Takeshi wanted to leave. He wanted to go home to his warm house where his mother would have dinner ready, where everything was predictable and made sense. But instead, he sat back down on his rock. Something about the old man's presence, his complete lack of concern about not knowing, held Takeshi there. They waited together in the darkness. The only sounds were the waves and the occasional cry of night birds hunting along the shore. The fisherman stood as still as if he'd been carved from stone, holding his rope, watching water he couldn't see. When he pulled in the nets this time, they were empty. Just tangled seaweed and a few small crabs that he gently returned to the water. "See?" Takeshi said, unable to help himself. "You didn't catch anything that time. If you knew what you were doing, you would have caught fish." The fisherman prepared his nets again. "Would I?" "Of course. That's the whole point, isn't it? To catch fish? Is it?" The old man cast his nets again into the invisible water. Takeshi opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. He realized he didn't actually know what the point was. He'd assumed the point was to catch fish, to be efficient, to know, and to succeed. But the fisherman seemed unconcerned with success or failure. He cast his nets and pulled them in. That was all. They went through the same cycle 4 more times. Full nets, then empty nets, then half-full nets, then empty again. Each time, the old man responded exactly the same way. No celebration when the nets were full. no disappointment when they were empty. Just the same calm attention, the same patient presence. As the night grew deeper and the moon rose over the water, Takeshi felt something shifting inside him. The restless need to understand, to know, to have answers began to quiet. Not because he'd found the answers, but because he was beginning to see that the questions themselves might be the problem. "Old man," he said finally, his voice softer now, "you really don't know, do you? You don't know where the fish are, or if they'll come, or why sometimes the nets are full and sometimes they're empty." "No," the fisherman said. "I don't know. Doesn't that bother you?" The old man was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "When I was young, like you, it bothered me very much. I wanted to know everything. I wanted to understand the tides and the moon and the fish and the currents. I wanted to have a method that would always work, a knowledge that would always succeed." He paused, checking his nets. "I spent years trying to learn these things. I watched the moon's phases. I studied where other fishermen cast their nets. I tried to find the pattern, the secret." "And did you find it?" "No," the old man said simply. "I found something else instead." "What?" "I found that not knowing is enough. More than enough. I found that casting nets into dark water without knowing what will happen is not a problem to be solved. It's just what casting nets into dark water is." He gestured toward the sea. "The water is deep. The fish move according to their own needs. I am here, and I cast my nets, and I receive what comes. Sometimes much, sometimes little, sometimes nothing. But I am still here. The water is still here. The night is still beautiful." Takeshi sat with this, turning it over in his mind. But what about planning? What about learning? What about trying to get better at something? "Those things have their place," the fisherman said. "I know how to mend nets. I know how to read the weather. I know how to clean fish and preserve them. These are useful things." He cast his nets again. "But the fish themselves, whether they come or not, that is not something I can know or control. So I stopped trying. And when I stopped trying to know what cannot be known, I discovered something strange." "What?" The not knowing stopped being a problem. It became just another part of the night, like the sound of the waves or the smell of salt. Something that is, rather than something that needs to be fixed. They were quiet together. The nets floated somewhere in the dark water. The stars turned slowly overhead. When the old man pulled in his nets this time, they were so full he needed Takeshi's help to drag them ashore. They worked together in the moonlight, removing fish after fish, their hands cold and wet and smelling of the sea. "You see," the fisherman said, and Takeshi thought he detected the smallest smile. "I still don't know." But the fish came anyway. Takeshi walked home that night with his mind strangely quiet. The usual rush of questions, the constant need to understand and know and figure things out, had softened to something more like curiosity. Not the aggressive curiosity that demanded answers, but a gentler kind that could simply wonder and be satisfied with wondering. From that night on, he often returned to watch the old fisherman. He never got more answers, but gradually he stopped needing them. This story speaks to something we all struggle with, the weight of needing to know. We live in a world that values certainty, that rewards those who have answers, that makes us feel uncomfortable with not understanding. We fill every silence with explanations. We try to predict every outcome. We exhaust ourselves attempting to know things that cannot be known. Takeshi was a bright boy, but his intelligence had become a burden. He couldn't simply be present to experience. He had to understand it, categorize it, figure it out. His mind never rested because it was always working, always seeking, always demanding that the world make sense on his terms. The old fisherman had learned something different. He discovered that not knowing doesn't have to be a problem. It can simply be a fact, like the darkness of the water or the unpredictability of fish. He cast his nets not from knowledge, but from presence. He stood there night after night, not because he'd figured out where the fish would be, but because standing there with his nets in the dark water was what he did. In Zen Buddhism, there's a teaching about holding uncertainty lightly, not seeking to eliminate it or overcome it, but learning to be comfortable with it, even to embrace it. This doesn't mean giving up on learning or growing or understanding what we can understand. It means recognizing that much of life is like fishing in dark water. We don't know what will happen. We cast our nets anyway. The fisherman's empty nets didn't upset him because he wasn't attached to a particular outcome. He wasn't fishing to prove his knowledge or to validate his method. He was just fishing. The fish came or they didn't come. Either way, he was still there under the stars, still present to the night, still participating in something larger than his own understanding. What would it feel like to cast your nets without knowing? To take action, make choices, live your life without the guarantee of understanding exactly what will happen. Not recklessly, not carelessly, but with the same steady presence the fisherman brought to his work. The questions will still be there tomorrow. The unknowns will still be unknown. But for these hours of rest, you can set down the burden of needing to know. You can stand at the edge of sleep like the fisherman at the edge of the sea, casting your nets into darkness, trusting what comes. In the mountains where morning mist clings to ancient pine trees, there was a path that led to a monastery known for its peaceful teachings. The path was long and steep, winding through forests and over rocky slopes where the air grew thin and the ground turned to loose stone. Many travelers attempted the journey, but few arrived unburdened. Kenji had been climbing since before dawn. He'd set out from the village below while stars still dotted the sky, determined to reach the monastery before nightfall. Now the afternoon sun beat down without mercy, turning the mountain path into a test of endurance. But the heat was nothing compared to the weight he carried. On his back was an enormous bundle, nearly as large as Kenji himself. It was wrapped in thick cloth and tied with rope that had worn grooves into his shoulders over the months of traveling. Inside were all the possessions he'd accumulated over his 30 years. Scrolls from his time as a scholar in the capital when he'd believed knowledge would bring him peace. Tools from when he'd abandoned scholarship to work as a carpenter, thinking that working with his hands would quiet his restless mind. Gifts from friends he no longer saw because he'd moved too many times searching for something he couldn't name. Letters from his parents, both gone now, that he carried but couldn't bear to read. A blanket his mother had woven the winter before she died, still smelling faintly of her house. Books he'd read once and promised himself he'd read again when he finally found the time, the peace, the right moment that never seemed to come. The straps dug deep into his shoulders, cutting through his robes. His knees trembled with each step upward. Sweat soaked through his clothes and dripped from his face onto the dusty path. His breathing came in short gasps. Every few steps he had to stop, bent over with his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. The monastery seemed impossibly far above him, its walls barely visible through the haze of afternoon heat. At a sharp bend in the path, beneath a twisted pine tree that grew sideways from the rocky cliff, an old woman sat resting on a flat stone. She was small and thin, her face deeply creased with lines that spoke of many years spent outdoors. Her hair was white and pulled back simply. She wore plain grey robes and had a single walking stick resting beside her. She carried nothing else. No bundle, no bag, not even a water flask. When she saw Kenji approach, struggling under his burden, she smiled with the kind of warmth that made him think of his mother. "Rest a moment, young man," she called out. "You look like you're about to collapse right here on the path." Kenji gratefully lowered his bundle to the ground. The relief was so immediate and so profound that he almost cried. He sat on a nearby rock, breathing hard, wiping sweat from his face with his sleeve. The old woman studied him with bright, curious eyes. There was something about her presence that felt peaceful, like sitting near a still pond. "Where are you headed?" she asked. To the monastery, Kenji managed between breaths. "At the summit. I seek to study with the monks there, to learn meditation, to find peace." He said this last part with more desperation than he intended. The old woman's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened with understanding. She glanced at his enormous bundle. "And you need all of that to find peace?" Kenji looked at his belongings, suddenly feeling defensive. His mind immediately began justifying each item. "These are important things," he said. "Each item has meaning, has value. The scrolls contain wisdom from great teachers. The tools might be useful. The letters, the blanket, these are all I have left of my parents. I might need them." "Might," the old woman repeated softly, as if tasting the word. She said nothing more. She simply sat there with her walking stick, looking as light and unburdened as a leaf, as if she might float away on the next breeze. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, she stood up with surprising ease for her age and began walking down the mountain path, moving steadily without any apparent effort. Kenji watched her go, disappearing around a bend with her single walking stick tapping gently against the stones. He sat a moment longer, dreading the moment when he would have to lift his bundle again. His shoulders already ached at the thought. But the monastery was still far above, and the afternoon was passing. If he didn't keep moving, he'd be caught on the mountain path after dark. With a grunt of effort, he hoisted the bundle back onto his shoulders. The weight settled onto him like a punishment. His knees nearly buckled. He began climbing again, but the path seemed to have grown steeper. Each step was agony. His shoulders burned. His back felt like it might break. The breath wouldn't come properly into his lungs. The thin mountain air made him dizzy. After only 20 steps, he had to stop again, gasping, seeing spots at the edges of his vision. Looking at his bundle with something close to hatred, Kenji reached inside with trembling hands. His fingers found a clay pot he'd carried from his old kitchen in the capital. He'd always liked that pot. It was well made, with a good weight to it. But when was the last time he'd actually used it? 6 months? A year? He couldn't even remember. He set the pot down by the side of the path, nestled against a rock so it wouldn't roll away. Someone else might find it useful. The bundle felt slightly lighter. He continued upward, but after another 50 steps, the weight became unbearable again. He stopped, breath ragged, and removed a set of carpentry tools. Beautiful tools, expensive, sharp, and well-maintained. He'd spent good money on them, but he hadn't worked with wood in over a year. He'd told himself he would return to carpentry someday, but that day never came. He placed them carefully beneath a tree, wrapped in their cloth. Further up the path, he removed a thick winter coat. Then a stack of letters he'd been carrying for months. Letters from people he'd met in his travels, people he'd promised to write back to but never had. Then books whose words he'd long since memorized, books he'd once thought he couldn't live without. Then a beautiful teapot someone had given him as a gift, still wrapped in silk. With each item he set down, he felt a complicated mix of relief and loss. Part of him wanted to gather everything back up, to not abandon things that had once meant something. But another part of him, a quieter part, felt lighter with each release. The climb became gradually easier. His breathing steadied. His steps grew surer. The path that had seemed impossible began to feel merely difficult, then challenging, then almost manageable. By the time he reached the halfway point, marked by a small stone shrine, he'd released nearly everything. His bundle now contained only a change of clothes, a water flask, a thin blanket, and his mother's woven blanket, which he still couldn't bring himself to leave behind. The difference was astonishing. He could stand up straight. He could breathe fully. The wind felt crisp against his face instead of oppressive. The sky seemed wider, bluer. He could actually notice the beauty around him, the way the late afternoon light turned the rocks golden, the sound of birds calling from the forest below, the smell of pine resin warming in the Sunday. As he approached the monastery gates near sunset, he saw something that made him stop in wonder. The old woman from the bend in the path was already there, sitting on a stone bench near the entrance, her walking stick resting beside her. She was watching the sun descend toward the horizon, her expression peaceful. "How did you?" Kenji began, then stopped himself. Of course she'd arrived first. She'd been carrying nothing but a walking stick, moving with the ease of someone who knew the secret he was only now learning. The woman looked at him and smiled. "Did you find what you were carrying?" Kenji wanted to say yes, to explain, but he realized he didn't fully understand the question. He set down his small remaining bundle and looked back down the mountain path. In the distance, he could see several of the places where he'd stopped, where he'd chosen to release something. Each spot marked a moment of decision, a choice to let go. "I thought I needed all of it," he said quietly. Every item had a reason, a story, a purpose. And now, Kenji considered this. Now I wonder if I was carrying things because I needed them, or because I was afraid of who I'd be without them. The old woman nodded. "That is a good beginning." She stood up, preparing to continue on her own journey down the mountain. But before she left, she turned back to him. "The monastery will teach you many things," she said. "But you have already learned the first lesson, the one that makes all other lessons possible." "What lesson is that?" "That you can put things down," she said simply. "That you can choose in each moment what you carry and what you release." This is the foundation of all peace." She bowed slightly to him, and he bowed deeply in return. Then she continued down the path, her walking stick tapping rhythmically against the stone, and soon she disappeared into the lengthening shadows. Kenji picked up his light bundle and walked through the monastery gates. A young monk greeted him and showed him where he could sleep. As Kenji lay down that night on a simple mat, he felt his body relax in a way it hadn't in years. Tomorrow he would begin his studies. But tonight, he simply rested, carrying nothing but his breath and the sound of wind moving through the monastery courtyard. This story reveals something important about the nature of our journey toward rest and peace. We often believe we need to carry everything with us. Our achievements, our memories, our identities, all the things we've collected along the way. Each item has a story, a justification. We tell ourselves we might need these things, that they define who we are, that letting go would mean losing something essential. But these accumulations can become so heavy that we can barely move forward. We become bent under their weight, unable to see the beauty around us, unable to breathe fully, unable to arrive anywhere because we're too exhausted from carrying everything. The old woman understood something that Kenji had to learn through experience. She carried only a walking stick. Not because she was poor or had nothing, but because she knew the difference between what serves the journey and what weighs it down. She moved with ease not because the path was easier for her, but because she wasn't struggling against unnecessary weight. In Zen Buddhism, there's a teaching about traveling light through life. It doesn't mean abandoning everything or pretending the past didn't happen. It means recognizing that holding on to everything actually prevents us from being fully present to anything. When Kenji was struggling under his enormous burden, he couldn't appreciate the afternoon light, or hear the birds, or feel the wind. His entire experience was consumed by the effort of carrying. Each item Kenji released had been important to him at one time. The scrolls represented his intellectual journey. The tools represented a different dream. The letters and gifts represented connections and memories. These things weren't worthless. But the question isn't whether something has value. The question is whether carrying it serves your journey right now, in this moment, on this particular path. As you settle into rest tonight, consider what you might be carrying. Not physical objects, but the mental and emotional burdens that weigh down your days and disturb your nights. Old arguments you keep replaying, even though they happened months or years ago. Decisions you keep questioning, even though they can't be unmade. Expectations that others placed on you long ago that you still carry as if they define who you must be. Identities you built in earlier chapters of your life that you're exhausted from maintaining. The path to peace doesn't get easier by wishing it were different or by building up the strength to carry more. It gets easier by recognizing what we no longer need to carry. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is not to hold on tighter, but to release our grip. In a city where merchants and scholars gathered, there was a tea house known throughout the region for serving the finest tea and for the wisdom of its owner. The tea house was small and simple, with paper walls that glowed softly with lantern light in the evenings, and a garden that bloomed with careful attention to each season. Inside, the space was arranged with perfect simplicity. A low table, cushions for sitting, and shelves that held only what was needed for the way of tea. Nothing extra, nothing wasted, nothing merely decorative. Master Tanaka ran the tea house. He was perhaps 60 years old, with grey hair pulled back simply and hands that moved with the kind of precision that comes from decades of practice. He was known not just for his tea, but for his ability to teach without speaking, to show truth through simple actions rather than complicated explanations. Students came from distant provinces hoping to study with him, though he accepted very few. One evening, as rain drummed steadily against the roof and mist rose from the garden, a young scholar named Hiroshi arrived at the tea house. He stood in the doorway shaking water from his expensive cloak, clearly annoyed at having gotten wet. Under his arm, he carried a thick bundle of scrolls bound with silk cord. These were his writings, his studies, his collected wisdom from years at the Imperial Academy, where he distinguished himself as one of the brightest students in his generation. Hiroshi had heard that Master Tanaka occasionally accepted students to teach about the way of tea, and through tea, about the way of life. He hoped to learn from the master, to add this knowledge to his already impressive collection of learning. Another scroll to add to his bundle, another certification of his understanding, another way to demonstrate his refinement and education. "Master Tanaka," Hiroshi announced as he entered, bowing quickly in the formal style of the capital. "I have traveled 3 days to meet you. I have studied with the greatest scholars in the land. I can recite all the major classics from memory. I understand philosophy, poetry, history, and the principles of governance. I have written commentaries that my teachers called brilliant. I hope you will share your wisdom with me so I might deepen my understanding of the tea ceremony and add this knowledge to my studies." Master Tanaka looked up from where he was preparing the brazier. He studied Hiroshi for a long moment, taking in the expensive robes, the proud bearing, the way the young man held his scrolls like treasures. Then he nodded quietly and gestured for Hiroshi to sit. Hiroshi arranged his scrolls carefully beside him, making sure they wouldn't touch the floor or get damaged by any stray drops of water. He adjusted his robes to sit in perfect formal position, back straight, hands positioned correctly, everything precise and proper according to the etiquette he'd studied. Master Tanaka moved slowly through the tea preparation. He ladled water from the pot into the kettle with careful attention. He wiped each implement with a cloth, his movements unhurried and graceful. He measured tea leaves from a simple ceramic container, the sound of the scoop against the leaves creating a soft whisper. The room filled with the subtle fragrance of heating water and tea. Rain continued its steady rhythm against the roof. Hiroshi waited impatiently. He'd expected the master to begin teaching, to explain the significance of each movement, to share the deeper meanings and symbolism. Wasn't that what teachers did? Instead, there was only silence and the simple actions of preparing tea. Finally, Master Tanaka lifted the teapot. Steam rose from its spout. He began to pour tea into Hiroshi's cup, a simple ceramic cup with no decoration. The tea flowed in a steady stream, the color of amber in the lamplight. The cup filled quickly, the liquid rising toward the rim. But Master Tanaka kept pouring. The tea reached the rim of the cup. Still, Master Tanaka's hand remained steady, the stream of tea continuing without pause. The tea began to overflow, spilling over the edge of the cup, spreading across the wooden table in a dark pool that moved toward Hiroshi's carefully arranged scrolls. "Master, stop," Hiroshi said, breaking his formal posture to jump up and snatch his precious scrolls away from the spreading tea. "The cup is full. It can hold no more. You're spilling it everywhere." Master Tanaka finally set down the teapot. The only sounds were the rain on the roof and the drip of tea falling from the edge of the table onto the floor. He looked at Hiroshi with calm, patient eyes. "Like this cup, the master said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. You are full of your own ideas, your own knowledge, your own certainties. How can I show you anything new when there is no room to receive it? Hiroshi stood frozen, his scrolls clutched against his chest. Tea dripped slowly from the table onto the floor, each drop marking a moment of silence. His mind raced with responses, with arguments, with ways to demonstrate that he wasn't too full, that he did have room to learn. But every response he formulated only proved the master's point. But master, he finally said, his voice smaller now, less assured, I have worked so hard to learn all of this. Years of study, countless hours. Surely my knowledge has value? Surely it means something? The value of a cup, Master Tanaka replied, beginning to clean up the spilled tea with slow, deliberate movements, is not in being full. The value of a cup is in its emptiness, in its capacity to receive. A full cup is useless for holding tea. You can appreciate it as an object, perhaps, but you cannot use it for its purpose. He wrung out the cloth he was using, the tea-stained water dripping into a bowl. You have filled yourself so completely with what you already know, the master continued, that there is no space for what you don't know. Every question I might pose, you already have an answer. Every teaching I might offer, you already understand. Or so you believe. Hiroshi looked down at his scrolls, at the silk cord binding them together, at all his carefully accumulated knowledge. For the first time in years, he saw them not as achievements, but as walls he'd built around himself, walls that kept out anything that might challenge or change what he thought he knew. How do I empty the cup? He asked quietly. Master Tanaka smiled, and something about that smile made Hiroshi think the master had been waiting for exactly that question. You begin, the master said, by recognizing it is full. That recognition itself creates the first small space, the first crack in the wall. He prepared fresh tea in a new cup, this time pouring with exquisite care, stopping just before the rim, leaving the smallest space at the top. Stay with me for a week, Master Tanaka said, offering the cup to Hiroshi. But leave your scrolls by the door. Each day we will practice one thing. Not learning. Unlearning. Hiroshi hesitated. His scrolls represented years of work, years of identity, years of believing that he was valuable because he knew so much. To set them aside felt like setting aside himself. But he looked at the overflowed cup, at the waste of good tea, at how his fullness had prevented him from receiving what was offered. Slowly, he walked to the entrance and carefully placed his bundle of scrolls on a shelf. They looked smaller there, somehow, less impressive than they'd seemed when he was carrying them. When he returned and sat down, something was different. He wasn't sitting in perfect formal posture anymore. He wasn't holding himself like a scholar who knew everything, who had to prove his worth through his knowledge. He was just sitting, uncertain and uncomfortable and open in a way he hadn't been in years. Master Tanaka handed him the fresh cup of tea. Drink, he said simply. Hiroshi raised the cup to his lips. The tea was perfectly warm, the temperature that allows you to taste every subtle note. It was bitter and sweet and complex, with layers that revealed themselves slowly. He had drunk tea hundreds of times before, expensive teas, rare teas, teas prepared by famous masters. But somehow this simple cup tasted like the first tea he'd ever tasted, like he was discovering tea for the first time. What do you notice? Master Tanaka asked. Hiroshi wanted to give an impressive answer. He wanted to demonstrate his refined palate, his knowledge of tea varieties and cultivation techniques, his understanding of water temperature and steeping time. All the knowledge he'd accumulated about tea tried to rush forward, tried to fill the space with familiar certainties. But something stopped him. He realized that if he filled this moment with everything he already knew, he would miss what was actually here. "I notice," he said slowly, the words feeling new in his mouth, "that I don't know what to say." Master Tanaka nodded. "Good. That is where we begin." For 7 days, Hiroshi stayed at the tea house. Each morning, Master Tanaka would prepare tea, and Hiroshi would practice emptying his cup, both literally and metaphorically. On the first day, this was agonizing. His mind kept wanting to fill every silence with knowledge, every moment with commentary, every experience with explanation. On the second day, he began to notice the spaces between thoughts, the brief moments when his mind wasn't rushing to categorize and explain everything. On the third day, he realized how exhausting it had been to always know, to always have an answer, to always be demonstrating his understanding. By the 5th day, he could sit with Master Tanaka in complete silence for an hour, just drinking tea, just being present, and it felt more full than any conversation he'd ever had. On the final morning, as Hiroshi prepared to leave, he walked to the shelf by the door where his scrolls waited. He stood looking at them for a long time. "You can leave those here if you wish," Master Tanaka said from behind him. "They will be safe." Hiroshi touched the silk cord that bound the scrolls. "I think," he said carefully, "I will take them. But I will carry them differently now." He picked up the bundle, and it felt lighter than before, even though nothing about it had changed. He bowed deeply to Master Tanaka, who bowed in return. "Come back," the master said, "when you have drunk all the tea in this cup." He handed Hiroshi an empty cup. Hiroshi smiled, understanding. He took the empty cup, placed it carefully in his robes, and walked out into the morning air. As he walked back toward the capital, he felt something he couldn't quite name. Lighter, yes, but also somehow more full in a different way. Full of space, full of possibility, full of not knowing that felt rich rather than frightening. The scrolls were still under his arm, but they no longer defined him. They were just scrolls, just paper and ink, just words about a world that was always more than words could hold. This teaching about the full cup speaks to something we all experience, often without recognizing it. We fill ourselves with opinions, with certainties, with things we're convinced we already understand. We accumulate knowledge, ideas, beliefs, and judgments until our minds become like Hiroshi's cup, so full that nothing new can enter. And in that fullness, we close ourselves off. Not intentionally, not with malice, but simply because there's no space. When someone offers us a new perspective, we already have our answer. When life presents us with an experience that doesn't fit our understanding, we try to force it into the categories we already know. When wisdom is offered, we're too busy demonstrating what we already understand to receive what we don't. In Zen Buddhism, this is called beginner's mind, the mind that doesn't already know everything, the mind that can look at something familiar and see it fresh, the mind that has space to receive. It's considered one of the most valuable qualities we can develop, and one of the hardest, because it requires us to release the very thing we often believe makes us valuable, what we know. Hiroshi's scrolls weren't wrong or worthless. His knowledge had real value. He had worked hard for it, and it represented genuine understanding. But his attachment to that knowledge, his need to be the person who knows, his certainty that he already understood everything important. These were the obstacles. Not the knowledge itself, but how he held it. When Master Tanaka let the tea overflow, he was showing Hiroshi what happens when we approach life already full. We waste what's offered to us. We damage what's precious to us, like Hiroshi almost ruining his beloved scrolls. We miss the very thing we came seeking because we're too full of ourselves to receive it. The practice of emptying the cup isn't about becoming ignorant or pretending we don't know things. It's about holding our knowledge lightly, about maintaining space for what we haven't yet understood, about staying open to being wrong or incomplete in our understanding. It's about recognizing that every answer we hold closes off certain questions, and sometimes the questions are more valuable than the answers. Master Tanaka's final gift to Hiroshi was an empty cup. Not a full cup of knowledge, not more teachings to accumulate, but emptiness itself. Because emptiness isn't nothing. Emptiness is potential, possibility, space for what wants to enter. The empty cup is ready. The full cup has nowhere to go. The rain that fell on the tea house that evening has long since dried. The tea that spilled on the table was wiped away. But the teaching remains, simple and clear and available to anyone willing to set down their bundle of scrolls, even just for a moment. When you are full, you cannot receive. When you empty yourself, you create space for what you truly need. In the mountains where ancient monasteries stood among groves of bamboo and cedar, there was a temple known throughout the region for the depth of its teachings. Monks came from distant provinces to study there, and those who completed their training were considered ready to teach others. Master Daishin had studied at this temple for 30 years. He had mastered all the texts. He had sat in meditation for thousands of hours. He had served in every role, from the lowest kitchen work to leading ceremonies. His understanding was so deep that other monks would come to him with their questions, and his answers were always clear and helpful. When the old abbot died peacefully in his sleep, there was no question about who should take his place. Master Daishin was the obvious choice. He had earned this position through decades of dedicated practice. Everyone agreed he was ready. The morning of his formal installation as the new abbot, Master Daishin woke before dawn as always. He performed his morning rituals, washed his face in cold water, and put on the ceremonial robes that marked his new position. The robes were heavy silk, ancient and carefully preserved, worn by every abbot who had served before him. As he walked through the monastery grounds toward the main hall where the ceremony would take place, something strange happened. He stopped in the courtyard, looking around as if he'd never seen it before. The other monks were already gathering, arranging themselves in careful rows, preparing for the ceremony. His assistant, a young monk named Kenso, approached him with a worried expression. "Master Daishin, everything is ready. The monks are assembled. We should begin." Daishin nodded slowly, but he didn't move toward the hall. Instead, he turned in a slow circle, his eyes moving over the courtyard, the buildings, the trees, as if he was trying to memorize everything, or perhaps trying to remember something he'd forgotten. "Master?" Kenso said again, more urgently. "Is something wrong?" "I'm not sure," Daishin said quietly. "Something feels different." "Of course it feels different. Today you become abbot. It's a momentous occasion." But that wasn't what Daishin meant. He walked toward the meditation hall, But instead of entering through the main door as an abbot should, he stopped and placed his hand on the wooden frame, feeling its texture under his palm. He'd walked through this door thousands of times. Why did it suddenly seem unfamiliar? Inside the hall, he was supposed to take his seat at the front, in the position of the abbot. But when he entered and saw the raised platform, the formal cushion, the arrangement that he'd seen every day for 30 years, he hesitated. "Where is that?" he asked Kenso. "What do you mean, master?" "That's the abbot's seat. Your seat now." "Is it?" Daishin sounded genuinely puzzled. The other monks were beginning to whisper among themselves. This was not how the ceremony was supposed to proceed. Master Daishin was supposed to be confident, authoritative, ready to step into his new role. Instead, he seemed confused, disoriented, almost childlike in his uncertainty. The head administrative monk, Genzo, approached with concern. "Master Daishin, are you unwell? Should we postpone the ceremony?" Daishin looked at Genzo, and there was something in his eyes that made Genzo stop. Not confusion exactly. Something else. A kind of clarity that was unsettling in its intensity. "I'm sorry," Daishin said. "I seem to have forgotten where I am." "You're at the temple," Genzo said carefully. "The temple where you've lived for 30 years. The temple where you're about to become abbot." 30 years, Daishin repeated. "Have I been here that long?" Now the whispers grew louder. Some monks exchanged worried glances. Had Master Daishin's mind broken under the pressure of his new responsibility? Had something happened to him during the night? But Daishin wasn't distressed. He was simply looking at everything with fresh attention, as if he'd never seen any of it before. He walked slowly around the meditation hall, running his fingers along the walls, looking up at the ceiling beams, stopping to examine the altar as if discovering it for the first time. "These walls," he said to no one in particular. "When were they built?" 200 years ago, Master, Kenso replied. "You know this. You've given tours to visitors explaining the temple's history." "Have I?" Daishin touched the wood. "They feel old, but also new. Does that make sense?" It didn't make sense to anyone. The ceremony was supposed to have started already. Important monks from other temples had traveled days to attend. But Master Daishin seemed to have forgotten not just the ceremony, but everything about who he was supposed to be. Finally, the eldest monk present, a visiting teacher named Hakuin, who had known Daishin for 20 years, stepped forward. "Daishin," he said, using the familiar name rather than the title. "What's happening with you?" Daishin turned to him, and there was something luminous in his expression. "I woke up this morning," he said, "and everything was new. The water on my face felt like water I'd never felt before. These robes feel like I've never worn them. This temple, these buildings, even my own hands when I look at them, everything feels like I'm seeing it for the first time." "But you're not seeing it for the first time," Hakuin said gently. "You've been here for decades." "Have I?" Daishin asked. "I don't remember yesterday. I know intellectually that there was a yesterday, that I have a history, that I've studied and practiced here for many years. But it feels very far away, like something I learned about rather than something I lived." He sat down on the floor, not on the abbot's cushion, but just on the wooden floor of the hall like a visitor might sit. "I don't remember who I'm supposed to be," he said. "I only know who I am right now, in this moment. And right now, I'm someone who doesn't know this place." The monks stood in uncertain silence. This was unprecedented. No one knew what to do. Hakuin sat down beside Daishin on the floor. "Tell me what you see when you look around this hall." Daishin gazed slowly around the space. "I see wood and light. I see people in robes standing very still, watching us. I see dust floating in the morning sun through those windows. I see shadows in the corners. I see my own breath making a small cloud in the cold air. And when you look at yourself, when you consider who you are—" "I don't know," Daishin said simply. "I feel aware. I feel present. I feel interested in everything around me. But I don't feel like anyone in particular. No history, no identity, no story about who I've been or who I should be. Just this moment, just this awareness, just this strange feeling that everything is completely new." Hakuin was quiet for a long time. Then he began to laugh. It was a deep, genuine laugh that filled the hall. The other monks looked at him in shock. What could possibly be funny about their abbot losing his mind on the morning of his installation? But Hakuin stood up and bowed deeply to Daishin. "Forgive me," he said. "I didn't realize we were in the presence of such profound realization." "What do you mean?" Kenso asked. "He hasn't lost his mind," Hakuin said. "He's found it. Or perhaps more accurately, he's lost everything that was covering it. The accumulation of identity, of history, of knowing who he is and how things are, all of it has fallen away. He's experiencing what Zen calls beginner's mind, but more completely than most of us ever do." He turned to Daishin. "Tell me, do you remember the teachings? The sutras you studied? The meditation techniques?" Daishin thought about this. "I remember that things were studied. I remember that there were words and ideas. But they seem empty now. Just sounds that were made. The meaning I thought they had, I can't quite recall why they seemed important." "Perfect," Hakuin said. He turned to address all the assembled monks. "We are witnessing something rare. Master Daishin has become completely present. The past exists for him only as an abstract concept, not as a weight he carries. He has no investment in who he used to be or who he thinks he should become. He is simply here, now, seeing everything fresh." One of the younger monks spoke up nervously. "But Master, how can he be abbot if he doesn't remember anything? How can he teach us if he's forgotten all the teachings?" "Watch," Hakuin said. He turned back to Daishin. "Tell me, what is Zen?" Daishin looked at him with those clear, present eyes. "I don't know." "What is this word Zen?" "It's what you've been studying for 30 years. "Have I?" Daishin smiled. "That seems like a long time to study a word I don't understand. What about Buddha nature? What about enlightenment? What about the path of awakening?" To each question, Daishin just shook his head with genuine puzzlement. "These are words. They sound important, but I don't know what they mean." Hakuin bowed again. "This is your teacher," he said to the assembled monks. "Someone who knows nothing, who carries no authority, who has no investment in being right or wise or accomplished. Someone who can only be present to what is, right here, right now." Some of the monks understood. Others remained confused. but Hakuin insisted the ceremony proceed. When Daishin finally sat on the abbot's cushion, he did so with the awkward uncertainty of someone who had never sat there before. Because in a sense, he hadn't. The person who sat there was not the master Daishin who had earned this position through decades of practice. It was just awareness itself, temporarily called Daishin, experiencing this moment of sitting on this particular cushion for the first time. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Daishin's state did not fade or return to normal. He continued to experience each day as if it were his first. He had to relearn where everything was in the monastery. He had to be reminded of people's names. He couldn't recall the schedule or the procedures or the formal protocols. But when monks came to him with questions, his responses were unlike anything they'd heard before. Freed from all the accumulated teachings and standard answers, he could only respond from direct presence. If someone asked about suffering, he might just say, "What's suffering?" Not as a clever Zen trick, but as a genuine question. If someone asked how to find peace, he might look confused and say, "Is it lost?" His not knowing was so complete, so genuine, that it cut through all the complexity and brought everyone back to the simple, immediate reality of just this moment. Just this breath. Just this awareness that needs no history, no identity, no story to be what it is. Some monks found this frustrating. They wanted the wise, knowledgeable teacher they'd expected. But others discovered something profound in Daishin's innocence. They began to see how much of their own understanding was just memory, just accumulated concepts, just ideas they'd accepted without truly seeing for themselves. Years later, monks would travel from distant temples to study with the abbot who had forgotten everything. And when visitors asked how long he'd been practicing Zen, he would always answer the same way. "I'm not sure what Zen is, but whatever this is, it's my first day." This teaching about beginner's mind, about experiencing everything fresh, reveals something profound about how we normally move through our lives. We carry the weight of our accumulated experiences, our learned patterns, our assumptions about how things are. We see through the filter of memory rather than meeting each moment directly. Master Daishin had spent 30 years learning, practicing, accumulating understanding. All of that had value. But notice what happened when it fell away. He didn't become ignorant or incapable. He became present in a way that was more direct, more immediate, more real than any of his accumulated knowledge had allowed. When we know a place, we stop seeing it. When we know a person, we stop discovering them. When we know ourselves, we stop being surprised by who we might be. The knowing becomes a barrier to actual experience. When you believe you already know how your day will go, you stop paying attention to what's actually happening. When you believe you already know a person, you stop noticing how they're changing. When you believe you already understand yourself, you stop discovering new aspects of who you are. The practice of beginner's mind doesn't require forgetting everything like Daishin did. It just requires recognizing that knowing can be a trap. Every time you think, "I know this," you've closed a door to fresh discovery. Every time you think, "I know myself," you've limited who you might become. What would it be like to move through tomorrow as if it were your first day? Not pretending you don't know practical things, not becoming confused about basic facts, but meeting your experience with the kind of fresh attention you'd bring to something completely new. Looking at familiar faces as if you'd never seen them before. Tasting familiar food as if you'd never tasted it. feeling familiar sensations in your body as if they were brand new. The Zen teaching of beginner's mind invites us to hold our knowledge lightly, to recognize that the map is not the territory, that our concepts about reality are not reality itself, that who we think we are is not the same as the awareness that's actually here, present in this moment. Daishin's innocence was not childish or foolish. It was the most sophisticated thing possible, the complete release of all the ways we normally filter and limit our experience through the lens of what we think we already know. In a province governed by officials who valued order and propriety above all things, there was a city where two teachers had come to offer their wisdom. The city was known for its beautiful temples and its wealthy patrons who supported scholars and spiritual teachers. When word spread that two renowned masters had arrived, the governor himself decided to meet them. Governor Watanabe was a careful man, educated and thoughtful, who took his responsibilities seriously. He'd been searching for a teacher for months, someone who could help him understand the deeper questions that troubled him despite his outward success. He'd read extensively about Zen Buddhism and felt ready to begin serious study. The two teachers arrived at his residence on the same day. Master Koji came first, bowing deeply at the entrance. He was perhaps 50 years old, with gentle eyes and a warm smile that immediately put people at ease. He wore simple robes but carried himself with quiet dignity. "Governor Watanabe," Master Koji said, his voice soft and respectful, "I am honored to be in your presence. Your reputation for wisdom and just governance has spread throughout the region. I believe you have the intelligence and compassion necessary to grasp the teachings of Zen. It would be my great privilege to guide you on this path." The governor felt pleased. This was exactly what he'd hoped for, a teacher who recognized his qualities, who would work with his strengths, who understood that he was an intelligent and capable student. They sat together in the garden, and Master Koji asked thoughtful questions about the governor's life, his responsibilities, his hopes for spiritual development. The master listened attentively, nodding with understanding, occasionally offering gentle observations that felt supportive and encouraging. "I can see," Master Koji said after their conversation, "that you are sincere in your seeking. With your natural wisdom and my guidance, I believe you will make excellent progress. The path of Zen will open to you like a flower opening to the Sunday." Governor Watanabe felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Yes, this was the right teacher. Someone who understood him, who would meet him where he was, who would make the journey pleasant and rewarding. Then, Master Ryokan arrived. He was older than Master Koji, perhaps 65, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at people. He didn't bow as deeply at the entrance. His manner was direct, almost brusque. The governor received him in the same garden, prepared to conduct the same kind of pleasant interview he'd had with Master Koji. "Governor Watanabe," Master Ryokan said, settling himself without waiting for an invitation to sit, "I've been told you wish to study Zen." "Why?" The directness caught Watanabe off guard. "I seek wisdom," he said, recovering his composure. "I want to understand the nature of mind and reality. I want to find peace beneath the pressures of my position." Master Ryokan studied him for a long moment. Then he grunted. "You want to feel special. You want to add Zen student to your list of accomplishments." The governor stiffened. "That's not fair. You don't know me." "Don't I?" Master Ryokan's voice wasn't cruel, but it was certainly not warm. "You're a governor. You're accustomed to people bowing and agreeing with you. You think Zen is another skill you can master, another way to prove your superiority. That's not true, Watanabe said. But even as he spoke, he felt uncertainty creeping in. Was it true? Had he been approaching Zen as another achievement? You have the look, Master Ryokan continued, of a man who has never been truly challenged. Everyone tells you how wise you are, how capable, how worthy of respect. And you've started to believe them. The governor's face grew hot. No one spoke to him this way, not even close friends or family members. Who was this rude old man to judge him so harshly? I think this interview is over, Watanabe said coldly. Thank you for coming, but I don't believe we would work well together. Master Ryokan shrugged. As you wish. You'll choose the other one, I suppose. The one who tells you what you want to hear. He stood to leave, but something in his words made Watanabe pause. What do you mean? The other master, Ryokan said, he's kind, encouraging. He'll make you feel good about yourself. You'll enjoy studying with him. You'll have pleasant conversations in gardens like this one. You'll read beautiful texts and discuss profound ideas. And in 10 years, you'll be exactly where you are now, just with more knowledge about Zen instead of actual understanding. And you? What would you offer that's so different? Nothing you would enjoy, Master Ryokan said bluntly. I would tell you when you're fooling yourself. I would point out every time you're performing spirituality instead of actually practicing it. I would make you uncomfortable constantly because comfort is your prison. The governor stood up, anger flashing hot in his chest. You're arrogant. Insulting. Why would anyone study with someone so harsh? They wouldn't, Ryokan agreed. Most people choose teachers who make them feel good. That's why most people never actually change. They just become more sophisticated at lying to themselves. He walked toward the gate, then turned back. But you asked an interesting question just now. You asked what I would offer. Not what would make you happy, but what I would offer. That's the first honest thing you've said since I arrived. After Master Ryokan left, Governor Watanabe sat alone in his garden, his thoughts churning. He kept replaying the conversation, feeling the sting of the master's words, formulating better responses he could have given. But beneath the anger and hurt pride, something else was stirring. A small voice asking uncomfortable questions. Was Ryokan right? Had he been approaching Zen as another accomplishment? Did he want wisdom, or did he want to be seen as wise? That evening, he called for his advisor, an old man who had served his family for decades and who was one of the few people who spoke honestly with him. Master Koji was kind and respectful, Watanabe said. Master Ryokan was rude and insulting. Obviously, I should study with Master Koji. Shouldn't I? The advisor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, May I speak freely, my lord? Always. You have been surrounded by people who defer to you your entire life. Your father was governor before you. You've never wanted for anything. You're intelligent and capable, but you've rarely been challenged or contradicted. When you make mistakes, people usually don't tell you. The governor felt defensive, but nodded for him to continue. The question is not which teacher is nicer, the advisor said. The question is which teacher will tell you what you need to hear rather than what you want to hear. Which one will help you see your blind spots instead of just confirming what you already believe about yourself? Watanabe sat with this for a long time. As night fell and lanterns were lit in the garden, he found himself thinking about the expression in Master Ryokan's eyes. It hadn't been cruel. It had been clear, like someone looking at him without any of the filters of status or politeness, just seeing what was actually there. The next morning, he sent a message to Master Ryokan. Not an invitation to teach, just a question. If I studied with you, what would be the first lesson? The reply came back within an hour. Stop asking questions that you already know the answer to. Governor Watanabe laughed despite himself. It was true. He'd known all along which teacher he should choose. He'd just been hoping someone would give him permission to choose the easier path. He sent another message. I would like to study with you, but I need to know, why are you so harsh? Why can't truth be delivered with kindness? Master Ryokan's response was longer this time. I am not harsh. I am clear. You are not used to clarity because you are used to people managing your feelings. When someone stops managing your feelings and just tells you the truth, it feels harsh. But it's not harshness. It's respect. I respect you enough to be honest with you. That afternoon, Governor Watanabe went to see Master Koji. He thanked him sincerely for his kindness and explained that he'd decided to study with Master Ryokan instead. Master Koji smiled warmly. I understand. He is a good teacher. Perhaps the better teacher for you. I hope you find what you're seeking. They bowed to each other with genuine respect, and the governor left feeling he'd made the right choice, even though it was the harder one. His first lesson with Master Ryokan was scheduled for the following week. When he arrived at the simple room where Ryokan was staying, he found the master sitting in meditation. Sit, Ryokan said without opening his eyes. Watanabe, Saturday. They stayed in silence for an hour. Then Ryokan opened his eyes. Tell me why you're here. To learn Zen, Watanabe said. Wrong. Try again. To find peace? Wrong. Try again. To understand myself? Closer. But still avoiding the truth. Watanabe sat in frustrated silence. Finally, he said, I don't know why I'm here. Now, Master Ryokan said, we can begin. They studied together for the next 5 years. It was not easy. Master Ryokan rarely praised him. Often, the master would point out when Watanabe was performing rather than practicing, when he was seeking approval rather than understanding, when he was attached to appearing wise rather than actually seeing clearly. But slowly, something shifted. The governor began to see his own patterns, his own defenses, his own ways of protecting himself from uncomfortable truths. He began to understand the difference between knowledge about Zen and actual insight. He began to change in ways that surprised him. Years later, when someone asked him about his choice of teacher, he said, I learned that you cannot find truth if you only listen to people who tell you what you want to hear. The kindest thing anyone can do is tell you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Master Ryokan gave me that gift. He cared enough about my actual growth to risk my dislike. That's real kindness, even though it doesn't always feel kind in the moment. This teaching about choosing the teacher who challenges us rather than the teacher who comforts us, speaks to something crucial in any real change or growth. We all naturally prefer people who make us feel good about ourselves, who validate our existing beliefs, who confirm that we're already on the right path. It's deeply human to want this. But comfort and growth often pull in opposite directions. The teacher who always agrees with us, who always sees our best qualities, who never challenges our assumptions or points out our blind spots, this teacher may make us feel good, but they won't help us see what we cannot see on our own. Notice that Master Ryokan wasn't harsh for the sake of being harsh. His directness came from respect, from treating Watanabe as someone capable of handling truth rather than someone who needed to be protected from it. In a strange way, his bluntness was more respectful than Master Koji's kindness, because it assumed Watanabe was strong enough to face himself honestly. In Zen Buddhism, this is sometimes called fierce compassion. It's the willingness to risk someone's comfort, even their temporary dislike, in service of their deeper well-being. It's easy to be nice. It's much harder to be truthful when truth is uncomfortable. The path to peace isn't always comfortable. Sometimes we have to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves, our patterns, our blind spots. We have to be willing to be wrong, to be challenged, to have our self-image disrupted. Master Ryokan gave Governor Watanabe something more valuable than pleasant conversations about Zen. He gave him the gift of seeing himself clearly, without the filters of politeness and deference that usually protected the governor from honest feedback. That clear seeing, painful as it was, created the possibility for actual change. In a desert where the wind never stopped moving the sand, where dunes shifted shape from morning to evening and landmarks disappeared overnight, there lived a people who had learned to travel without maps. They were nomads, following ancient routes that weren't marked on any surface but were carried in memory and passed down through generations. A merchant named Ichiro had traveled from the coast to trade with these desert people. He was a practical man, used to roads and clear directions, maps and signposts. The desert made him uneasy with its endless shifting, its refusal to stay in any fixed form. His business concluded, Ichiro prepared to return home. The nomad chief warned him that a sandstorm was coming, that he should wait a few days for it to pass. But Ichiro was impatient. He had family waiting for him, trade deals that couldn't wait, a life that needed attending to. "I know the way," he told the chief. "I came here following the sun and the stars. I can return the same way." The chief looked doubtful, but didn't argue. "May you find your way," he said, and it sounded less like encouragement and more like a question. Ichiro set out at dawn with his camel and his supplies. The first day of travel went well. He followed the sun, kept his bearing straight, made good progress. The second day was equally clear. He congratulated himself on his decision not to wait. The storm the chief had worried about seemed to be nothing more than an old man's excessive caution. On the third day, just after noon, the sky began to change. The blue faded to yellow, then to orange. The wind picked up, gentle at first, then increasingly aggressive. Within an hour, Ichiro found himself in the sandstorm the chief had warned about. It was unlike anything he'd experienced. The wind howled from every direction at once. Sand filled the air so thickly he couldn't see his camel's head in front of him. He pulled his cloth over his face and urged his camel to kneel. There was nothing to do but wait. The storm lasted 2 days. When it finally passed and the sky cleared to blue again, Ichiro looked around at a landscape that had completely changed. The dunes were in different positions. The rocks that had marked his path were buried. The tracks of his own passage had vanished. Even the texture of the sand looked different, smoothed by wind into new patterns. He pulled out his mental map, his memory of landmarks and directions. But nothing matched. The desert had rearranged itself while he'd hidden from the wind. Ichiro chose a direction that felt right and began walking. After several hours, he stopped, uncertain. Was this the way he'd come? It looked familiar, but then again, all the desert looked somewhat familiar and somewhat strange at the same time. He walked for another day, his water supply diminishing, his confidence fading. At night, he tried to use the stars to orient himself, but the stars only told him directions, not destinations. North meant nothing without landmarks to measure it against. On the evening of his second day of wandering, Ichiro saw a small fire in the distance. Relief flooded through him. He urged his tired camel toward it. As he approached, he saw it was one of the desert nomads, an old man sitting alone by his fire, his camel resting nearby. The man looked up as Ichiro approached, unsurprised, as if he'd been expecting a visitor. "You are lost," the old nomad said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Ichiro admitted. "The storm changed everything. I can't find my way." The nomad nodded and gestured for Ichiro to sit by the fire. He offered water and dried dates, which Ichiro accepted gratefully. "Which way should I go?" Ichiro asked. "Which direction leads to the coast?" The old man considered this. "Which way do you think you should go?" "If I knew, I wouldn't be lost." "Are you lost, or are you simply here?" Ichiro felt frustration rising. These desert people had a way of answering questions that wasn't really answering. "I need to get home. My family is waiting. I have obligations. I need to know which way to go." The nomad stirred the fire. "The desert doesn't have ways. The desert is always changing. The way you came is not there anymore. The way you think you should go is based on a map that no longer exists. Then how do you find your way? How do you know where you're going?" "We don't," the old man said simply. "We move. We pay attention. We feel the quality of the wind, the type of sand, the subtle changes in the land. We don't follow ways. We find ways." "That's not helpful," Ichiro said. "I need specific directions." The nomad looked at him with patient eyes. "You want me to give you a map for a desert that has no fixed form. You want me to tell you how to get to where you think you should be based on where you think you are. But what if you're not where you think you are?" "What do you mean?" "Where are you right now?" Ichiro looked around. "I'm in the desert, lost somewhere between your camp and the coast." "No," the old man said. "You're here, by this fire, in this moment. This is where you are. But that's not where I want to be." "Ah," the nomad smiled. "Then you're lost not in the desert, but in the distance between where you are and where you want to be." Ichiro sat in frustrated silence. This conversation felt like it was going in circles, like the desert itself. The nomad poured him more water. "Tell me, when you were traveling toward our camp, were you lost then?" "No. I knew where I was going." "Did you? Or did you simply move through the desert, day by day, paying attention to the sun and the land until you arrived?" Ichiro thought about this. It was true that he hadn't known the exact route. He'd just traveled, made decisions each day based on what he saw and felt, trusted that movement in a general direction would eventually lead where he needed to go. So, how is now different? The old man asked. Because then I was going somewhere. Now, I don't know where I am or which way to go. You are here, the nomad repeated. And the coast is in a direction. Tomorrow, when the sun rises, start walking toward where it sets. Pay attention to the land. Notice the quality of the sand. Feel the wind. The desert will show you the way if you stop trying to impose your old map on its new form. But what if I walk the wrong direction? What if I get more lost? You can't get more lost than you already are, the old man said. Lost is just a story you tell yourself about not being where you think you should be. But you're always somewhere. Right now, you're here. Tomorrow, you'll be somewhere else. That's not lost. That's just moving through space. They sat in silence. The fire crackled. The night was clear and cold. Above them, stars filled the sky in such abundance that Ichiro had never seen anything like it. The storm was necessary, the nomad said eventually. It erased your old way so you could discover a new way. Or more accurately, so you could discover that there is no fixed way. There's only where you are and where you move to next. The next morning, Ichiro prepared to leave. He felt different somehow, though he couldn't quite name how. The old nomad gave him extra water and pointed toward where the sun would set. Walk, he said. Pay attention. Trust. Thank you, Ichiro said. I hope I find my way. You're already on it, the nomad replied. Ichiro walked for 3 more days. He stopped trying to match what he saw to what he remembered. He stopped worrying about being lost. He just moved, paying attention to subtle signs in the landscape, following his instincts, trusting that movement would eventually lead somewhere. On the 4th day, he saw the ocean. He'd found his way not by following a map or knowing the route, but by being completely present to where he was in each moment, by letting go of his certainty about how things should be and opening himself to how things actually were. When he finally arrived home, his family asked about his journey. I got lost in the desert, he told them. And in being lost, I found something I hadn't known I was looking for. What's that? His wife asked. That being lost is just another way of being somewhere. That not knowing where you are is sometimes the most honest relationship you can have with where you are. This teaching about being lost speaks to something we all experience but rarely examine. We navigate our lives with maps, plans, expectations about where we should be and how to get there. When reality doesn't match our maps, we feel lost, disoriented, anxious. We believe something has gone wrong. But what if being lost is simply being present to reality as it is, rather than as we think it should be? What if the feeling of being lost comes not from actually being in the wrong place, but from the gap between our expectations and our experience? Ichiro's certainty about the way home was based on a desert that no longer existed. The storm had changed everything. His map was useless. But he didn't realize this immediately. He kept trying to match what he saw to what he remembered, kept trying to force the new landscape into his old understanding. This is what made him lost. Not the changed desert, but his insistence that it should still match his memory of it. The old nomad understood something Ichiro had to learn. In a place that's always changing, certainty is a trap. The nomads didn't navigate by fixed maps. They navigated by constant attention, by reading the present moment, by trusting their ability to respond to what was actually there rather than what they expected to be there. When the nomad said, "You are here," he was offering Ichiro a profound teaching. Not that Ichiro was geographically located in a specific spot on a map, but that his actual experience, his actual reality, was right here, right now. The coast might be days away, but that distance only existed as an idea. What actually existed was this fire, this moment, this awareness of being alive in a vast desert under infinite stars. We spend so much energy trying to figure out where we are in relation to where we think we should be. Am I on the right path? Am I making progress? Am I where I should be at my age, in my career, in my relationships, in my life? These questions assume there's a fixed map, a right way, a place we're supposed to be. But what if life is more like the desert after the storm? Always changing, never fixed, impossible to navigate with old maps. What if the feeling of being lost is just what it feels like to be alive in a reality that refuses to match our expectations? The nomads knew this. They couldn't know where they were going in any absolute sense. But they knew how to be where they were. They knew how to read the present moment, to feel the wind, to notice the quality of the sand, to move with attention and trust, rather than with certainty and control. This is what the Zen teaching of not knowing offers us. Not the anxiety of being lost, but the freedom of being here, fully present to what is, responding to reality rather than trying to force reality to match our expectations. In a bustling town along the main trade route between the capital and the coast, there lived a calligrapher known throughout the region for his beautiful work. His studio was small and simple, just a wooden table set up near the marketplace where travelers and locals would stop to watch him work or commission pieces for special occasions. A young monk named Soshin had been traveling for weeks, searching for a teacher. He'd heard of a great Zen master who lived in this town, someone who could guide him toward deeper understanding. But no one he asked seemed to know who this master was or where to find him. One afternoon, tired and discouraged, Soshin sat on a stone wall near the marketplace, watching the people pass. Merchants called out their wares. Children ran between the stalls. The smell of grilling fish and fresh bread mixed with the dust from the road. His eyes settled on an old man working at a calligraphy table. The man was perhaps 70, with white hair tied back simply and hands that moved across the paper with unhurried grace. He was painting characters onto rice paper, each stroke deliberate and flowing. Soshin watched for a while, finding something peaceful in the old man's presence. Eventually, he stood up and approached the table. "Excuse me, elder," Soshin said, bowing respectfully. "I'm searching for a Zen master who lives in this town. I've been told he's a great teacher, but no one seems to know where I can find him. Have you heard of such a person?" The old man didn't look up from his work. He dipped his brush in ink and began forming a new character on fresh paper. "A Zen master?" he said quietly. "What would his name be?" "That's the problem," Soshin admitted. "I don't know his name. I was just told he lives here and that he's known for his wisdom." The old man nodded slowly, still focused on his painting. "I've lived in this town a long time, but I don't recall meeting anyone who calls themselves a Zen master. Soshin felt his discouragement deepening. He'd come so far based on rumors and hope. Perhaps the master had moved away, or perhaps the stories had been exaggerated. "Are you certain?" Soshin pressed. Perhaps someone known for their teaching or their meditation practice? The old man set down his brush and lifted the paper he'd been working on, holding it up to catch the afternoon light. The character he'd painted was elegant and strong, the ink still wet and glistening. A sudden gust of wind came through the marketplace, stirring dust and lifting the corners of fabric at the merchant stalls. The wind caught the paper in the old man's hands, and before he could secure it, the delicate sheet tore free and went tumbling through the air. They both watched as the paper danced on the wind, the wet ink beginning to smear and blur. It landed in a puddle of water near a vegetable stall, the character dissolving into illegible darkness. The old man looked at the ruined work without any visible distress. He simply turned back to his table and prepared a fresh sheet of paper. "That was beautiful work," Soshin said. "Aren't you upset that it was destroyed?" "Was it destroyed?" The old man asked mildly. He dipped his brush again. "Or did it just change form? The ink is still in the world, just no longer arranged as I arranged it." Soshin sat down on a small stool near the calligraphy table, his search for the master temporarily forgotten. There was something in the old man's presence that felt restful, unhurried, complete. "Have you been a calligrapher for long?" Soshin asked. The old man paused, his brush hovering over the paper. "I'm not sure," he said after a moment. "It feels both very long and not long at all." "How can you not be sure? Surely you remember when you started?" "I remember learning to hold a brush. I remember the feeling of ink on paper. But when that was, how many years ago, that feels uncertain. Time has a way of blurring together when you do something every day." He began painting a new character. His strokes were confident, but not rushed, each line appearing exactly where it needed to be. "What's your name?" Soshin asked. The old man's brush paused mid-stroke. He looked at Soshin with an expression of mild puzzlement, as if the question had surprised him. "My name?" he repeated. "Yes. What are you called?" The old man set down his brush and looked at his hands, turning them over as if they might provide an answer. "That's interesting," he said quietly. "I seem to have forgotten." "Forgotten your name?" Soshin couldn't hide his surprise. "How can you forget your own name?" "I'm not sure," the old man said. He didn't sound distressed, just genuinely curious. "People call me different things. Old master, or calligrapher, or sometimes just elder. But my actual name, what I was called when I was young, it's somewhere in my memory, but I can't quite reach it." He picked up his brush again and continued his painting. "It's strange how much of ourselves we carry in a name. When I try to remember mine, I feel like I'm trying to remember who I was supposed to be rather than who I am." Soshin watched him work. The character taking shape on the paper was the word for empty or void. The old man painted it with complete attention, each stroke connected to the breath, the hand moving as if the character was painting itself. "Doesn't it bother you?" Soshin asked. "Not knowing your own name? Should it?" The old man completed the final stroke and set down his brush. "I know how to paint." I know how to prepare ink and paper. I know the feeling of sitting here as the sun moves across the sky. I know the faces of the people who pass by each day. These things I know directly. But my name, that's just a sound other people make to get my attention. Whether I remember it or not doesn't change who I am in this moment. He looked at Soshin with clear, peaceful eyes. Who are you when no one calls your name? Who are you in the space before anyone speaks to you? That's what I experience most of the time now. Not being someone with a particular history and identity, but just being this awareness, this presence, here at this table, painting characters. A customer approached, interrupting their conversation. She wanted a blessing painted for her new grandchild. The old man listened to her request, nodded, and began painting. His brush moved across the paper with the same steady grace, and the woman watched with reverence, clearly seeing something special in his work. When she left, clutching her rolled paper carefully, Soshin said, "People respect you. They come to you for important things. Surely you must have some reputation, some name that people know you by?" "Perhaps," the old man said. "But reputation is like a name. It's something others carry, not something I need to hold." He cleaned his brushes in a small bowl of water, watching the ink spread and dissipate in the clear liquid. "When I was younger, I worried very much about my name, my reputation, whether people thought well of my work. I carried all of that like weight. But somewhere along the way, I set it down. Or perhaps it just wore away, like these characters will wear away if left in the sun and rain." Soshin sat quietly, absorbing this. After a while, he said, "I think I've been searching for the wrong thing." "What were you searching for?" "A teacher with a name, with a reputation, with credentials that would prove he could teach me. But maybe the best teacher is someone who's forgotten all of that." The old man smiled slightly. "Or maybe you've just found an old calligrapher who's forgotten his name. Sometimes things are exactly what they appear to be, nothing more." As the sun began to set and the marketplace grew quieter, Soshin helped the old man pack up his supplies. They worked together in companionable silence, and Soshin realized he felt more peaceful than he had in weeks of searching. "May I come back tomorrow?" Soshin asked. "The table will be here," the old man said. "Whether I remember you or not." Soshin laughed, unsure if the old man was joking. But when he returned the next day, and many days after, he discovered that the calligrapher's forgetting was genuine. Each day, Soshin had to introduce himself again. Each day, they would talk as if for the first time. And each day, Soshin learned something he couldn't quite put into words, something about presence and letting go, about being here without needing to be anyone in particular. Years later, when people asked Soshin about his teacher, he would say, "I studied with an old calligrapher. I never learned his name, and he never learned mine. But in that not knowing, I learned more than any name could teach." This teaching about forgetting your name speaks to something subtle but profound about identity. We carry our names, our roles, our reputations like weights. They tell us who we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to act, what's expected of us. We build entire structures of self around these labels. The old calligrapher had let go of even the most basic label, his own name. Not through effort or practice, but through a natural process of releasing what wasn't necessary. He didn't need to know his name to paint beautifully. He didn't need a reputation to be present to each moment. He didn't need identity to be aware, to breathe, to exist. Notice that his forgetting wasn't a loss. He hadn't become less capable or less present. If anything, he'd become more present because he wasn't carrying the weight of being someone in particular. Each moment was fresh. Each conversation was new. Each day was his first day sitting at that table, painting characters. In Zen Buddhism, there's a teaching about the self being empty, not meaning we don't exist, but meaning we're not the fixed, solid thing we think we are. The self is more like a river than a rock, always flowing, always changing, never actually the same from one moment to the next. The name, the identity, the story we tell about who we are, these are like trying to capture the river in a photograph. The photograph might be useful, but it's not the river. When Soshin asked, "Doesn't it bother you?" the calligrapher responded with his own question, "Should it?" This points to something important. We assume forgetting who we are would be distressing because we believe our identity is essential to our existence. But what if it's not? What if who we are in this moment, in this immediate experience, is enough? Consider what you might discover if you forgot your name, not literally, but in the sense of releasing your attachment to being someone in particular. What would remain? What would you lose? And might what remains be more real, more present, more alive than the identity you've been carrying? In a province known for its artists and craftspeople, there was a painter who had gained recognition for the extraordinary simplicity of his work. His name was Sato, and people traveled from distant cities to watch him paint or to commission pieces for their homes. Sato specialized in one subject only. He painted circles. Just circles. Nothing else. No landscapes, no portraits, no complex scenes. Only circles, painted with a single brushstroke in black ink on white paper. A wealthy lord named Takamori had heard of this painter and wanted to own one of his works. Takamori was a collector, and his mansion walls were covered with expensive paintings from famous artists. He believed that owning a Sato original would be the crown of his collection. He sent a messenger to Sato's studio with a generous payment and a request for the painter's finest work. The messenger returned the next day with a rolled piece of paper, which Takamori eagerly unrolled on his viewing table. The painting showed a single circle, painted in bold black ink. The brushwork was masterful, the lines strong and confident, flowing with perfect rhythm. But something was wrong. The circle wasn't finished. Just before the line would have connected with its beginning, just before the circle would have been complete, the brush had lifted. There was a gap, a small opening, a space where the ending should have met the beginning. Takamori stared at this gap with growing irritation. He'd paid good money for a finished painting, not this incomplete sketch. He called for his steward. "Take this back to the painter," he said. "Tell him I paid for a finished work. This circle has a gap. He forgot to complete it." The steward took the painting back to Sato's studio. When he explained the problem, Sato looked at the painting with mild interest. "I see," he said. "The Lord believes the circle is unfinished." "Isn't it?" the steward asked. "There's clearly a gap." Sato said nothing. He simply rolled up the painting and sent it back with the steward, along with a note that said only, "The circle is as complete as circles can be." This answer infuriated Takamori. Was the painter mocking him? Making a joke at his expense? He was a lord, not someone to be trifled with by some eccentric artist. He decided to visit Sato's studio himself to demand a proper explanation. Sato's studio was small and spare, just a single room with paper walls that let in soft light. The painter sat at a low table, preparing ink, grinding it slowly in a stone well with careful attention. "Master Sato," Takamori said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "I paid you well for a painting. You sent me an unfinished circle. I want either a completed work or my money returned." Sato looked up from his ink preparation. He was perhaps 50, with a calm face and hands stained permanent grey from years of ink work. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to a cushion across from him. "Let me show you something." Takamori sat, though he remained rigid with irritation. Sato laid out a fresh sheet of paper. He dipped his brush in the newly prepared ink, held it poised for a moment, then brought it to the paper in a single, flowing motion. His whole body moved with the brush, the line emerging from the center of the page, curving smoothly, confidently, creating a perfect arc. And then, just before the line would have completed the circle, he lifted the brush. Another incomplete circle. "You see?" Takamori said. "You did the same thing. You stopped before finishing." "Did I?" Sato asked. He laid out another sheet of paper and painted another circle, again stopping just before completion. Then another, and another. Each one identical, each one with that same small gap where the ending would have met the beginning. "Why do you keep stopping?" Takamori demanded. "Why not complete even one circle?" Sato set down his brush. "When does a circle become complete?" "When it closes. When the line connects with itself." "And then what?" Takamori frowned. "What do you mean, and then what?" "Then it's a circle. A finished thing. Perfect and complete." Sato nodded slowly. "A finished thing. Perfect and complete. Nothing left to do. Nowhere left to go. Is that what you want?" "That's what a circle is," Takamori said, feeling his certainty beginning to waver somehow. "Is it?" Sato gestured toward the window where a cart was rolling past on the road outside. "Look at that wheel. Is it complete?" "Of course. It's a circle. And yet it keeps turning. If it were truly complete, truly finished, would it move?" Takamori opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. He looked at the wheel, at its constant rotation, its endless movement. Sato picked up one of the incomplete circles. "This line," he said, tracing his finger along the painted arc, "contains the entire journey of the brush. Beginning, middle, and end. When I lift the brush here, just before completion, something remains possible. The circle could still become. It hasn't finished becoming yet." "That doesn't make sense," Takamori said, but his voice was quieter now, less certain. "Look at the gap," Sato said, holding the painting up to the light. "What do you see there?" "Nothing. Empty space." "Exactly. And is that nothing part of the circle or separate from it?" Takamori studied the gap. It was small, just a finger's width of white paper between where the line ended and where it began. But now that he looked at it, he couldn't quite separate the gap from the rest of the circle. The gap defined the circle as much as the line did. Without that space, there would be no beginning, no end, no journey of the brush. The moment I complete the circle, Sato continued, it dies. It becomes a finished thing, static, unchanging. But while this gap remains, the circle is still alive, still in motion, still becoming. The incompleteness is not a flaw. It's what keeps it breathing. He laid out several of his incomplete circles on the table. In Zen, we say that the gap between words is where truth lives. The space between notes is where music happens. The emptiness in a bowl is what makes it useful. If I close this circle, I would be closing off possibility. The gap is an invitation, an opening, a space for you to enter and complete it yourself, or to leave it incomplete and let it remain in motion. Takamori sat in silence, looking at the paintings. Slowly, something shifted in his perception. The gap that had seemed like a mistake, like incompleteness, began to look different. It became the most important part of the painting. The breath, the pause, the space where something could still happen. "How long have you been painting circles this way?" he asked quietly. 30 years, Sato said. In the beginning, I tried to paint perfect circles, completely closed. I studied technique. I practiced endlessly. And I created many perfect circles. What changed? One day, my brush slipped. I was completing a circle, and at the last moment, my hand trembled. The line didn't quite connect. I looked at this mistake and saw something I'd never seen in all my perfect circles. I saw life, movement, possibility. Since then, I've never closed a circle. He prepared fresh ink. Every complete thing is already dead. Every finished thought is already old. Every closed circle is already a tomb. But this, he painted another arc, lifting his brush just before completion. This is still alive. Takamori picked up the painting Sato had originally sent him. He looked at it with new eyes. The gap that had irritated him now seemed like the painting breathing, like space for his own experience to enter and participate. "I understand now," he said. "Or at least, I'm beginning to. May I keep this painting?" "It was always yours," Sato said. "Though perhaps now you can see what you're keeping." Takamori took the painting home and hung it in his private study, not in the main gallery with his other important artworks. Every day he would sit before it, looking at that small gap, that space where the circle almost but not quite completed itself. And in that gap, he found something his other perfect, finished paintings could never give him. He found an opening, a breath, a space for his own awareness to rest. Years later, visitors to his home would ask about the painting. "It's not finished," they would say, pointing to the gap. And Takamori would smile. "Exactly." This teaching about the incomplete circle reveals something subtle about perfection and completion. We spend our lives trying to finish things, to complete our projects, to tie everything up neatly, to reach the point where we can finally say, "Done." We believe that completion is the goal, that perfection means nothing left incomplete. But Sato understood something different. The moment something is complete, it stops moving. It becomes fixed. It closes off possibility. The incomplete circle remains open, alive, in motion. The gap is not a flaw. It's breath. In Zen Buddhism, there's a concept called mu, which points to emptiness or nothingness, not as absence but as potential. The gap in Sato's circles is this kind of emptiness. It's not missing something. It's making space for something. Space for the viewer to participate. Space for the circle to continue its journey. Space for life to move through. Notice how Takamori's response changed when he stopped seeing the gap as a mistake. The same painting that had irritated him became something he treasured, not despite its incompleteness, but because of it. His perception shifted. The flaw became the feature. The gap became the gift. What in your life are you judging as incomplete or imperfect that might actually be exactly as it needs to be? What gaps are you trying to close that might be better left open? What incompleteness are you fighting against that might be inviting you to see differently? The brush that lifts before completing the circle trusts that the gap has its own completeness. The circle is finished not when it closes, but when the painter knows it has said what it came to say. Sometimes what it comes to say is, stay open, keep breathing, remain in motion, don't close off too soon. As you rest tonight, notice the gaps in your own experience. The space between thoughts, the pause between breaths, the moments of not knowing between one certainty and the next. These gaps are not failures. They're openings. They're where life continues to move, where possibility remains alive, where the circle of your awareness keeps turning without ever quite closing itself off from the mystery of what comes next. In the high mountains where the air grows thin and the world falls away, there lived a man who had spent many years seeking truth. His name was Tetsuya, and he had traveled to distant temples, sat with renowned masters, and meditated beneath ancient trees until his legs grew numb and his back ached with the stillness. One morning, as the first light touched the mountain peaks, Tetsuya opened his eyes and understood. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no flash of lightning, no voice from the heavens. Simply a quiet recognition, like remembering something he had always known but had forgotten in the noise of searching. He sat for a while longer, watching the way the light moved across the valley below. Then he stood, gathered his few belongings, and began the long walk back to his village. The path down the mountain was familiar. He had walked it many times before, carrying questions up and doubts back down. But this time felt different. His feet found the stones naturally. His breath moved easily. The weight he had carried for so long had somehow lifted, though he could not say exactly when or how. After several days of walking, Tetsuya arrived at the edge of his village. It looked exactly as he had left it. The same houses with their thatched roofs. The same well in the center of the square. The same fields stretching toward the forest. An old friend named Daichi was drawing water from the well. He looked up as Tetsuya approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "You have returned," Daichi said, setting down his bucket. "We wondered if you would ever come back from the mountains." "I have come back," Tetsuya said simply. Daichi studied his face for a long moment. "You look different. Calmer, perhaps. Did you find what you were searching for?" "Yes," Tetsuya replied. "I found it." "Good," Daichi said, nodding. "That is very good. Come, walk with me. I was just heading to cut firewood. We can talk while we work." Tetsuya followed his friend along the path to the forest. The morning sun warmed his shoulders. Birds called from the trees. everything was ordinary. Everything was exactly as it should be. They reached a clearing where fallen trees lay among the undergrowth. Daichi handed Tetsuya an axe from his cart. It felt heavy and familiar in his hands. "So tell me," Daichi said as he positioned a log, "what did the masters teach you? What great wisdom did you learn?" Tetsuya raised the axe and brought it down. The blade split the wood with a satisfying crack. He picked up another piece and set it on the stump. "They taught me many things," he said, swinging the axe again. "About emptiness and form. About the nature of mind. About letting go and being present. And now you understand these things?" "Yes, I think I do." Daichi nodded, splitting his own log. "That is wonderful. So what will you do now?" Tetsuya paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked at the pile of wood they had already cut, at the forest around them, at his friend's patient face. "I suppose I will cut wood," he said. "And carry water, the same as before." Daichi laughed, a deep sound that echoed through the trees. "The same as before? Then what was the point of all those years away?" But his eyes were twinkling, and Tetsuya understood that his friend was not mocking him. Daichi picked up his axe again. "Tell me," his friend continued, "when you cut this wood now, is it different than before you left?" Tetsuya considered this carefully. He raised his axe and brought it down, feeling the weight of it, the resistance of the wood, the sound of the split, the smell of fresh timber. He had done this same action hundreds of times before leaving for the mountains. Thousands of times, perhaps. "The wood is the same," he said slowly. "The axe is the same. My hands are the same. Then what has changed?" Tetsuya set down his axe and looked at his palms. They were the same hands that had gripped this axe years ago. The same calluses, the same scars from old cuts. "Before," he said, "when I cut wood, my mind was always somewhere else. I was thinking about what I needed to do next, worrying about whether I had enough wood for winter, wishing I was doing something more important, something more meaningful." He picked up another log and placed it carefully on the stump. "Before, I cut wood in order to be finished cutting wood. I carried water in order to be done carrying water. Everything was a task to complete, so I could move on to something else. And now?" Tetsuya raised the axe and brought it down. The blade sank deep into the wood, splitting it cleanly. "Now I am just cutting wood," he said. "Just this. Nothing more, nothing less." They worked together in silence for a while. The sun rose higher. The pile of split wood grew. Sweat soaked through their robes. It was hard work. It had always been hard work. But Tetsuya found himself smiling. Later, as they loaded the wood onto the cart, Daichi spoke again. "Do you remember old Master Fumio from the village?" "Of course. He passed away while I was in the mountains." "Yes. Do you know what he used to say?" Daichi secured the last bundle of wood with rope. "He used to say that before he studied Zen, mountains were mountains and rivers were rivers. Then, when he began studying Zen, mountains were no longer mountains and rivers were no longer rivers. But after many years of study, mountains were once again mountains and rivers were once again rivers." "I remember that saying," Tetsuya said. "I never understood what it meant. Do you understand it now?" Tetsuya thought about this as they began pulling the cart back toward the village. The wheels creaked. The wood shifted and settled. His feet found their rhythm on the familiar path. "I think I do," he said finally. "When I first left the village, I thought cutting wood was just cutting wood. A simple task, nothing special. Then I learned about presence and mindfulness and enlightenment, and suddenly cutting wood became this profound practice. I was trying to cut wood mindfully, trying to be present while cutting wood, trying to make it into something spiritual. And now cutting wood is just cutting wood again. But it's different. I'm not trying to make it special. I'm not trying to make it ordinary. It's simply what it is. And that's enough." Daiichi smiled, but said nothing. They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence. When they reached the village, they unloaded the wood near Daiichi's house, stacking it carefully for the winter ahead. "Will you stay in the village?" Daiichi asked when they finished. "Or will you go back to the mountains?" Tetsuya looked around at the familiar houses, the well, the fields. He could hear children playing somewhere nearby. Smell bread baking. Feel the solid earth beneath his feet. "I will stay," he said. "The mountains taught me what I needed to learn. But life is here. The wood still needs cutting. The water still needs carrying. The fields still need tending. These things have not changed." "But you have changed." "Perhaps. Or perhaps I have simply returned to what I always was, beneath all the seeking and striving." That evening, Tetsuya drew water from the village well. The bucket was heavy as he pulled it up, hand over hand. The rope was rough against his palms. The water sloshed and sparkled in the fading light. He had drawn water from this same well countless times in his youth. Back then, it had been just another chore. Something to get done quickly so he could move on to more interesting things. During his time in the mountains, he had sometimes thought about these simple tasks with a kind of nostalgia, imagining them as profound practices he had been too blind to appreciate. But now, drawing water from the well, he was doing neither of those things. He was not rushing through a chore. He was not turning it into a spiritual practice. He was simply drawing water. His hands pulled the rope. The bucket rose. The water poured into his jar. That was all. That was everything. A young boy from the village approached, carrying his own bucket. "Master Tetsuya," the boy said shyly. "They say you have returned from the mountains, that you have become enlightened." Tetsuya smiled. "I have returned from the mountains, yes. Will you teach me what you learned?" Tetsuya handed the boy the rope. "Draw water from the well," he said. The boy looked confused, but did as he was told. He threw the bucket down and began pulling it back up. "Now what?" The boy asked when his bucket was full. "Now carry it home," Tetsuya said. "Carefully, so you don't spill any." "But that's all?" "That's all." The boy stood there, clearly expecting something more profound. Tetsuya understood. He had once been the same way, always seeking the hidden meaning, the secret teaching, the special practice that would unlock understanding. "When you carry the water," Tetsuya said gently, "just carry the water. When you eat your dinner, just eat your dinner. When you sleep, just sleep. This is the whole teaching. The boy nodded slowly, though the confusion had not entirely left his face. He bowed and walked away, carefully balancing his bucket. Tetsuya picked up his own jar and headed home. The water was heavy. His arms grew tired. These were simple facts, neither good nor bad. Tomorrow, he would cut more wood, draw more water, tend the fields. His life would be filled with these ordinary tasks. And in each one, if he remained present, if he stayed awake to the simple reality of what was happening, there would be nothing to seek, nothing to achieve, nowhere else to be. The mountains had taught him how to be present. But it was here, in the village, doing these simple things, that he would actually live that presence. This was what he had been seeking all along. Not something extraordinary. Not some special state of consciousness. Just this. The world as it is. Life as it happens. One moment, then another, then another. As Tetsuya walked, the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He had seen many sunsets in the mountains. This one was no different, and yet completely unique. Like every moment, it would never come again. He smiled, feeling the weight of the water jar against his hip, the solid ground beneath his feet, the cool evening air on his skin. He was home. He had always been home. The journey had been necessary to understand this simple truth. When we hear stories of people who travel far seeking wisdom, we often imagine they will return transformed, elevated, somehow different from who they were. Tetsuya's story reveals something else entirely. The journey changed everything and nothing at all. Think about the tasks that fill your daily life. Making coffee, washing dishes, walking to work, folding laundry. How often are you actually present for these moments? How often is your mind already racing ahead to the next thing or dwelling on something that happened yesterday? There is a teaching in Zen that says, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The same actions, the same world. But the person doing them has shifted in some fundamental way. Tetsuya discovered that wisdom does not transport us to some higher plane where we no longer have to deal with ordinary tasks. The dishes still need washing. The wood still needs cutting. What changes is the quality of attention we bring to these moments. When Tetsuya cut wood before his journey, he was cutting wood to be finished with cutting wood. His mind was anywhere but in the present moment. The action was just a means to an end. Something to get through. When he cut wood after his journey, he was simply cutting wood. His mind was not racing ahead or lagging behind. He was present to the weight of the axe, the resistance of the wood, the sound of the split, the smell of the timber. The action was complete in itself, not a means to something else. This might sound like a small difference, but it changes everything. When we are constantly treating the present moment as something to get through so we can reach some better moment in the future, we never actually arrive anywhere. We spend our entire lives waiting for life to begin. Consider your own patterns. When do you find yourself rushing through the present to reach the future? When you eat, are you really tasting your food, or are you already thinking about what comes next? When you talk with someone, are you really listening, or are you planning what you will say? The wisdom Tetsuya gained was not about changing his circumstances. He did not need to stay in the mountains or become a monk or renounce the world. He simply needed to be present to the life he was already living. There is another layer to this story that deserves attention. Tetsuya's friend Daichi asks an important question. Then what was the point of all those years away? It is a fair question. If Tetsuya has simply returned to cutting wood and carrying water, what did the journey accomplish? The answer is that sometimes we need to leave in order to return. Sometimes we need to seek in order to stop seeking. Tetsuya could not have understood the value of ordinary life without first leaving it behind. His time in the mountains was not wasted. It was necessary. But it was necessary not because the mountains held some secret that the village lacked. It was necessary because Tetsuya needed to exhaust his seeking before he could settle into simply being. Many of us are like the young Tetsuya, convinced that wisdom lies somewhere else, somewhere more spiritual, somewhere more meaningful. We imagine that if we could just find the right practice, the right teacher, the right teaching, then we would finally understand. Then we would finally be happy. Then life would finally begin. But wisdom is not hiding somewhere else. It is right here, in the dishes that need washing, the water that needs carrying, the wood that needs cutting. The question is not whether these tasks are worthy of our attention. The question is whether we will actually pay attention while we do them. What tasks in your life have you been treating as interruptions? What parts of your day do you rush through, barely present? What if these moments are not obstacles to overcome, but life itself, waiting to be experienced? The master in the story said that after many years of practice, mountains are once again mountains and rivers are once again rivers. But they are different mountains and different rivers. Or rather, we are different people looking at the same mountains and rivers. Nothing in the external world needs to change for us to find peace. The circumstances of our lives do not need to be different. We do not need to be somewhere else, doing something else, being someone else. We just need to actually be here, doing this, being ourselves. This is perhaps the most challenging teaching in all of Zen Buddhism. It is challenging because it is so simple. We want complicated practices. We want secret teachings. We want something that justifies all our seeking and striving. But the truth is just this: be here, now, fully present to what is actually happening. Tetsuya's story invites us to look at our own lives with fresh eyes. What are you seeking that you might already have? What are you trying to reach that you might already be standing in? What transformation are you waiting for that might simply be a matter of being present to who you already are? The wood still needs cutting. The water still needs carrying. These tasks have not become more spiritual or more meaningful. They have simply become what they always were, life itself, unfolding moment by moment. And that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. In a small village nestled between rice fields and forest, there lived a young man named Kazuo. He was known for being always in motion, always busy, always rushing from one thing to the next. He would wake at dawn and immediately begin his work. He tended his family's fields, ran errands for neighbors, helped at the market. From sunrise to sunset, Kazuo never stopped moving. "Slow down," his mother would say. "You will wear yourself out." But Kazuo could not slow down. There was always something that needed doing. Always another task, another obligation, another place to be. He moved through his days like a stone rolling down a hill, gathering speed, unable to stop. One morning, Kazuo needed to deliver a message to a merchant in the next village. The message was urgent, or so he believed. Everything seemed urgent to Kazuo. He saddled his horse quickly, not bothering to check the straps properly, not taking time to speak to the animal or prepare it properly for the journey. As soon as he mounted, the horse began to move. Kazuo had barely settled into the saddle before the animal broke into a trot, then a canter, then a full gallop. The wind whipped past his face. The road blurred beneath the pounding hooves. Kazuo gripped the reins tightly, but he did not pull back. The horse was already going in the general direction he needed to go. Fast was good. Fast meant he would arrive quickly. Fast meant he could get this done and move on to the next thing. They galloped past rice fields and through groves of bamboo. They splashed across a shallow stream and climbed a low hill. The horse showed no sign of slowing. If anything, it seemed to be gaining speed. An old farmer stood at the edge of the road, watching them approach. As they thundered past, the farmer called out, "Young man, where are you going in such a hurry?" Kazuo did not have time to think. He replied over his shoulder, "I don't know, ask the horse." The words left his mouth before he realized what he had said. And as soon as he heard them aloud, something shifted inside him. "I don't know. Ask the horse." He was on a horse, galloping at breakneck speed, and he did not actually know where he was going. Oh, he had a destination in mind. A village. A merchant. A message to deliver. But in this moment, right now, he was not steering the horse. The horse was carrying him. He was just along for the ride, holding on, pretending to be in control. For the first time in a very long time, Kazuo actually noticed what was happening. He felt the muscles of the horse bunching and stretching beneath him. He felt how tightly he was gripping the reins, his knuckles white with tension. He felt the way his body was rigid with the effort of staying on, as if he was fighting the animal rather than riding it. And he realized something troubling. He could not remember the last time he had actually chosen to do something. He woke up and began moving because that was what he did every day. He rushed from task to task because there were always tasks waiting. He never stopped to ask himself what he actually wanted to do. He just did what seemed to need doing next. He was like a leaf in a stream, carried by the current, tumbling along without any choice in the matter. Except, unlike a leaf, he had somehow convinced himself that he was steering, that he was in charge, that he was deciding. Carefully, cautiously, Kazuo began to pull back on the reins. Not hard. Not suddenly. Just a gentle pressure, testing whether the horse would respond. The horse ignored him and kept galloping. Kazuo pulled a bit harder. Still nothing. The animal had its own momentum now, its own ideas about where it was going and how fast. "Easy," Kazuo said, his voice shaking slightly. "Easy now." He pulled back more firmly, leaning his weight back in the saddle. Finally, reluctantly, the horse began to slow. From a gallop to a canter. From a canter to a trot. From a trot to a walk. And then, finally, they stopped. Kazuo sat on the horse in the middle of the road. His heart was pounding. His hands were trembling. The horse stood quietly beneath him, flanks heaving, steam rising from its coat in the cool morning air. How long had it been since he had stopped like this? Just stopped. Not because he had arrived somewhere. Not because a task was finished. Just stopped. He looked around. He had no idea where he was. The road stretched behind him and ahead of him. Fields on either side. A mountain in the distance. It could have been anywhere. He had been so focused on getting somewhere, getting things done, keeping up with everything that needed doing, that he had stopped noticing where he actually was. He was always leaning forward into the next moment, never present to this moment. Slowly, Kazuo dismounted. His legs felt shaky as his feet touched the ground. The horse turned its head to look at him, as if asking what happened to all that urgency. "I'm sorry," Kazuo said to the animal, running his hand along its neck. "I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't really choosing. I just got on and let you run." The horse exhaled a long, slow breath. They stood together in the quiet of the road. Kazuo realized he was thirsty. When had he last stopped for water? He realized he was tired. When had he last rested without feeling guilty about it? He realized he did not actually care about delivering this message urgently. It could wait. Most things could wait. What could not wait was this, the need to actually be present to his own life. The need to stop pretending that rushing through everything was the same as living. He led the horse to a stream beside the road. While the animal drank, Kazuo cupped his hands and drank too. The water was cold and clean. He could not remember ever tasting water this clearly before. Had he always drunk so quickly, so absently, that he never actually tasted anything? They rested there for a long while. Kazuo had no idea how long. Time felt different when he was not racing against it. Eventually, he remounted the horse. But this time, he was different. He held the reins with attention, but not desperation. When he asked the horse to move, he felt it respond. Not because it had its own agenda, but because he was actually present, actually aware, actually making a choice about where they would go and how fast. They walked. Just a quiet walk along the road. Kazuo noticed everything. The way the sun filtered through the leaves. The sound of birds in the forest. The smell of earth and growing things. When had he last noticed any of this? He thought about his life. All the rushing. All the constant activity. He had thought he was being productive. Efficient. Responsible. But now he wondered if he had simply been avoiding something. Avoiding stillness. Avoiding silence. Avoiding the questions that arise when you stop moving long enough to ask them. What did he actually want? Not what he thought he should want. Not what others expected of him. But what did his own heart desire? He did not know. He had been so busy doing what needed to be done that he had never asked. By the time Kazuo reached the next village, it was afternoon. The merchant was surprised to see him moving so slowly, so calmly. "I expected you hours ago," the merchant said. The message was urgent. "It arrived when it arrived," Kazuo said. He delivered the message, received the reply, and prepared to ride back home. But before mounting his horse, he paused. He checked the saddle properly this time. He spoke to the animal, letting it know what he intended. He took a moment to simply breathe and arrive fully before beginning the journey home. The ride back was different from any ride he had ever taken. He was not racing. He was not letting the horse carry him wherever it wanted to go. He was riding. Actively, consciously, presently riding. He chose the pace. He chose when to stop and rest. He chose when to move forward. It took much longer than usual to get home. But when he arrived, he felt more rested than if he had been sleeping. Because for the first time in years, he had not been fighting himself. He had not been at war with the present moment, constantly trying to push through it to reach some imagined future. His mother looked at him strangely when he dismounted. "What happened to you?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "You look different. Calmer. Like you are actually here." Kazuo smiled. "An old farmer asked me where I was going. I told him I didn't know. That he should ask the horse." His mother laughed. "And what did the horse say?" "Nothing. But I started to listen." How many times a day do you find yourself moving forward without knowing why? Not because you choose to, not because it serves you, but because you are already in motion and stopping feels harder than continuing. This is the predicament of the rider who has forgotten he is holding reins. The horse goes where it wants. You tell yourself you are steering. But are you? Or are you just along for the ride, gripping tightly, hoping you do not fall off? Think about your habits, your routines, your automatic behaviors. How many of them did you consciously choose? How many of them continue simply because you have not paused long enough to question them? Every day we get on our horses. Our jobs, our relationships, our ways of spending time, our patterns of thinking. Some of these horses serve us well, but some have been carrying us places we do not actually want to go. And we have been holding on so tightly, moving so fast, that we have not noticed. The question is not whether you can stop the horse. You can. The reins are in your hands. They have always been in your hands. The question is whether you will. What would happen if you paused right now? Not later. Not when things calm down. Not when you have finished everything on your list. Right now. What would happen if you stopped, even for a moment, and asked yourself, where am I actually going? Do I want to be going there? Am I choosing this, or is this just momentum? These are not comfortable questions. It is easier to keep moving, easier to stay busy, easier to let the horse run and pretend we are steering. But at some point, if we want to live our own lives instead of being carried along by them, we have to pull back on the reins. Kazuo's moment of recognition came when he heard his own words, "I don't know. Ask the horse." Sometimes we need to hear ourselves, really hear ourselves, to recognize the truth of our situation. Listen to what you say. Listen to how you explain your choices. How often do you say, "I have to," when you actually mean, "I have chosen to," though I am not sure why? How often do you say, "I can't," when you mean, "I am afraid to"? The rider who realizes he is not steering has a choice. He can panic, which only makes things worse. Or he can breathe, settle, and begin to gently reclaim control. Not through force, not through fighting, but through presence, through attention, through conscious choice. What would it mean to take up the reins in your own life? Not to control everything, not to force everything to be different, but simply to be present enough, aware enough that you are actually making choices instead of being carried along by momentum. Some habits serve us. Some routines help us. The practice is not to eliminate all patterns and start over. The practice is to become aware of what we are doing and why. To notice when we are choosing and when we are just being carried. You do not have to change everything at once. Kazuo did not leap off the horse and walk the rest of the way. He just stopped. He breathed. He let himself arrive in the present moment. And from there, he was able to ride consciously instead of unconsciously. What is one thing in your life that you do automatically without thinking? Just one thing. It does not have to be big. It can be small. How you start your morning. How you respond to certain people. How you fill your free time. Can you bring awareness to it? Can you pause before doing it and ask, do I actually want to do this? Is this serving me? Am I choosing this? You might find that yes, you do want to keep doing it. And that is fine. The point is not to change everything. The point is to choose, to be present, to hold the reins. Or you might find that no, this habit no longer serves you. It is just momentum, an old pattern. And when you see this clearly, you can choose differently, not through force, not through willpower, but through simple, clear awareness that frees you to respond in a new way. The horse will still run if you let it. That is the nature of horses, of habits, of momentum. But you do not have to let it. The reins are in your hands. They have always been in your hands. The only question is whether you will pick them up and begin, gently, to steer your own life. Kazuo returned to his village different from how he left. Not because his circumstances had changed, but because he had stopped being a passenger in his own life. He had taken up the reins, and from that moment forward, wherever he went on purpose, by choice, present to what he was doing and why. This is available to you too, right now. In this moment, you can stop the horse. You can pause and breathe and notice where you actually are and whether this is where you want to be going. You can begin one small choice at a time to steer your own life instead of being carried by it. The horse will still be there tomorrow. The momentum will still be there. The habits and patterns and routines will still exist. But you can meet them differently. Not as forces that control you, but as energies you can work with, redirect, or sometimes just slow down enough to see clearly. Where are you going? Do you know? Or should we ask the horse? We have traveled together through many stories tonight. Stories of travelers and fishermen, of students and masters, of ordinary people discovering extraordinary truths in the midst of their everyday lives. Each story was different, yet each pointed to the same simple recognition. Peace is not somewhere else. It is not in the future, waiting for you to arrive. It is not hidden in some distant teaching or practice. It is here, now, in the simple fact of being alive and aware. The burdens you carry can be set down. The questions that trouble you can rest for the night. The striving and seeking and trying to figure everything out can pause. Just for now. Just for these quiet hours of rest. You have listened. You have been present. That is enough. More than enough. The ancient masters whose stories we shared tonight discovered something simple. They found that wisdom is not complicated. It does not require special knowledge or years of practice. It simply asks that we be here, fully, for the life we are actually living. Tomorrow will come with its tasks and challenges. But tomorrow is not here yet. Tonight, there is only this. Your breath moving in and out. Your body settling into rest. The gentle darkness holding you. Nothing needs to be different for you to rest deeply. You do not need to solve your problems first. You do not need to become someone else or achieve something more. You can rest exactly as you are, right where you are, right now. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts quiet. Let yourself sink into the simple peace of not needing anything to be different than it is. The stories are complete. The teachings have been offered. And now there is only sleep. Deep, restorative, natural sleep. May you rest well. May you wake refreshed. May you carry with you, in whatever small way, the simple wisdom that peace is always available in the present moment. The night holds you gently. There is nowhere you need to be but here. Nothing you need to understand or figure out. The stories have done their work, and now they fade like ripples on water, leaving only stillness behind. If your mind still moves, let it move. Thoughts will come and go like clouds across the sky. You do not need to stop them or follow them. Just notice them passing and return your attention to the simple rhythm of breathing. In and out. Rising and falling. The breath that has been with you since your first moment and will carry you gently into sleep. The fisherman's nets have been pulled in for the night. The calligrapher's brush has been set down. The traveler has reached the monastery gates. And you, too, have arrived where you need to be. Right here. Right now. Safe and held by the darkness. There is great kindness in allowing yourself to rest. Not because you have earned it or deserve it, but simply because rest is a natural part of being alive. Like breathing. Like the turning of day into night. Sleep comes when you stop resisting it, when you soften into the present moment and trust that you can let go. Everything that needs to be done will wait until morning. Everything that needs to be solved can rest until then. For now, there is only this gentle descent into sleep. This slow releasing of the day. This quiet returning to the deep peace that is always here, beneath all our activity and worry. The old masters would say that sleep is a kind of meditation. A natural letting go that happens when we stop trying to hold on. Your body knows how to do this. It has always known. All you need to do is allow it. Trust the wisdom that lives in your bones, in your breath, in the ancient rhythms that move through you without effort. Feel the weight of your body against the surface beneath you. Notice how the earth holds you, supports you, asks nothing in return. You are held, always held, even when you forget. Even when you feel alone or lost or uncertain. The ground is still there. The breath is still moving. Life is still happening, gently, quietly, carrying you forward into rest. In this moment, there is no problem to solve. No question that demands an answer. No person you need to be or become. Just this breathing body, this aware presence, this simple fact of being alive right now. And that is enough. It has always been enough. The The stories spoke of fishermen and travelers, of monks and farmers and calligraphers. But they were all speaking about you, about the journey you are on, about the burdens you carry and the peace that waits when you set them down, about the ordinary moments that hold everything sacred when we finally pay attention. Let sleep find you the way water finds its level, without effort, without striving, just a natural settling into what is already here. Your eyes are heavy or they are not. Your mind is quiet or it is not. Either way is fine. Sleep will come in its own time, in its own way, and you do not need to chase it. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.